Hello everyone, hope you all doing well. Today I am going to provide you a book called The Beauty in Breaking. I hope that you like it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give us a like to video, and let's get started.
Introduction. As I cradled my patient's head in my hands, I looked past the watery wells of his eyes. For a moment, I didn't notice the blood that ran in rivulets across my gloves as it poured from his scalp, or the bits of gray and white brain matter that dotted the sheets. The beeping of the monitors around me, the popping sound of 4 catheter tops being flicked off by nurses, the screeching of wheels as equipment was dragged across linoleum floors, the nurses and techs yelling directions at one another, the stifled gasps erupting from the 2 medical students on their first shift attempting in vain not to be startled, all were drowned out as I stood over this young man and tried to ease his agitation. This is the part of being a doctor that medical school doesn't cover, that case reviews don't prepare you for. This is the part you can't really know until you're in the moment. You are the person responsible for saving the human life that slowly slips through your fingers while silently begging for final redemption under the demanding fluorescent lights. I am the doctor whose palms bolster the head of the 20-year-old man with a gunshot wound to his brain. I support the baby as she takes her first breath outside her mother's womb. I hug the wife whose husband is dying from advanced liver disease as she implores the universe to take away his pain. I claim no special powers, nor do I know how to handle death any better than you. What I know is that for 36 hours a week I reside in the melee that is a hospital emergency room, where I am called upon to be salve, antidote, and sometimes Quran. Most of the time my job is to keep death at bay. When I am successful, I send the patient back out into the world. When I'm not, I am there as life passes away. I'm not so deluded as to think that I alone am capable of making that kind of difference. I'm well aware that the determination of who lives and who dies doesn't happen at my hands alone. There are times when, despite the designs of any patient, family member, friend, or doctor, death will come. Then, I am witness. What I can do is be the fairy woman who holds the body as the last breath escapes. The one who, like the night sentinel, calls out the hour and does her best to convey that all is well. Like everyone, I am in this world for only a brief time, and as for many, blessings abound in my life, and they abound amid my struggle. Over the decades I've learned to cultivate a personal state of stillness. As a child, that stillness grew from a dissociation I stumbled upon that allowed me to better endure life with a father who was a batterer, and with a family legacy of As a black woman, I navigate an American landscape that claims to be post-racial when every waking moment reveals the contrary. An American landscape that requires all women to pound tenaciously against the proverbial glass ceiling, which we've since discovered is made of palladium, the kind of glass that would sooner bow than shatter. When I began writing this book, I had started over. My marriage to my college sweetheart had ended. I had moved to a new city to start a new job. Plagued with doubt, I found myself having to reevaluate my life. Living through such changes was difficult. Now, I see those junctures, when everything I had counted on came to an abrupt end, as a privilege. They gave me the opportunity to be uncertain, and in that uncertainty grew opportunity. From childhood to now, I have been broken many times. I suspect most people have. In practicing the Japanese art of kintsukuroi, one repairs broken pottery by filling in the cracks with gold, silver, or platinum. The choice to highlight the breaks with precious metals not only acknowledges them, but also pays tribute to the vessel that has been torn apart by the mutability of life. The previously broken object is considered more beautiful for its imperfections. In life, too, even greater brilliance can be found after the mending. As an emergency medicine physician, I know how to be still for others. I know how to call down the gods of repose and silence, to take the measure of their power in the moments when I need it most. This stillness I inhabit as I pause, push, breathe, and grow. The stories I tell here will, I hope, take you into the chaos of emergency medicine and show you where the center is. This center is where we find the sturdy roots of insight that can't be windthrown by passing storms. In their grounding they offer nourishment that can, should we allow it, lead to lives of ever-increasing growth. I had to find this center for myself as I took stock of experiences that were exceedingly painful, yet that ultimately filled me with the promise of a meaningful rebirth. A rebirth that is worth the surviving, worth the healing, worth the repair. Chapter By Michele, A Wing and a Prayer. I am 7.5. I am bathed in a quiet, punctuated only by the rhythmic, upsweeping whistle of the northern cardinal's song. It's almost never like this, but right now the only sound emerging from our three-bedroom colonial is the refrigerator's hum. No one is screaming or yelling, no one is punching, no one is being hit, no piece of furniture has toppled to the floor. Today there are no new bruises and no new scars. It is Saturday afternoon, and it is absolutely tranquil. My brother, sister, and father are out. My mother is down the hall in her room. I gather up 3 of my favorite My Little Pony figurines, holding one in each hand and tucking one under my left arm, leave my bedroom, and walk downstairs. All I can hear is the whisper my socks make with each step on the hardwood floor. After moving to Washington, D.C., when I was 4 years old, my family proceeded to change homes 3 times within a 4-mile distance. Homes 2 and 3 were less than a mile apart. Each move was precipitated by my parents' desire to live in increasingly attractive homes, in increasingly exclusive neighborhoods. It was a game whose prize was not comfort, but prestige, so they bought and sold homes, until they ultimately lost. This is home number 2, on 16th Street in Northwest Washington, close to the border with Silver Spring, Maryland. I walk down the staircase that ends in the foyer, then through the foyer to the living room, and finally to the fish room, so named by my little sister and me for the large aquarium that is its centerpiece. Asterisk. The people on my mother's side of the family were very superstitious. You don't walk under ladders. At all costs, you avoid breaking a mirror. You always look at the new moon over your right shoulder. And you never ever split a pole. The fish tank fit neatly into this paradigm. As my parents explained, it was meant to activate positive chi and block the negative energy in an environment. The tank was home to a small array of tropical fish, Siamese fighting fish, whose fins were a rainbow of fiery plums giving way to reds, were always included in the aquarium selection. What seemed like every several weeks the fish would die, and then my parents would buy new ones, which would suffer the same fate. It struck me as strange that they simply replaced the fish without first conducting a thorough analysis on what had caused the aquatic massacre. Today, as I enter the fish room, I note that the aquarium, a 30-gallon rectangular glass prism atop a simple, tall, black metal stand, has recently been replenished. Sun pours through the window panes, casting shadows on the butterscotch wood. I settle cross-legged on the floor and masterfully jockey my team of horses over each groove and shifting beam of light. They are skilled and graceful jumpers, but what else could be expected of ponies from a peaceful paradise estate? Completely absorbed in the play, I feel an ease suffuse my entire being. For those cherished minutes, the armor that encases my spirit loosens, and I am wholly open to the moment. Then, as if on Pegasus's wings, I feel a presence floating with me in the room, next to the red velvet sofa, in front of the fish tank, which faces the bay window. When I look for it, it is just me, alone, in the softly lit room. I see no one, though I feel and hear a gentle essence. Her voice is so familiar that when she speaks, it's as if the words were my own. Michelle, you are okay. You will be okay. You will be safe. Your mother will be safe. Your brother and sister will be safe. Security was perhaps the only thing I ever wanted, and up to that point it had remained a long and granted wish. The benediction continues. You will live. You must. Your mother will live. Your brother and sister will live. You will grow to see that you will help many people. You will grow to do great. You must. I sit on the floor, the ponies strewn about me, momentarily forgotten. I feel my eyes widen more with each word. It is the stupor in the face of answered prayer, the astonishment of gratitude. For once, nothing in me is afraid. And just like that, as soon as she has arrived, she is gone. Just one message, and then she vanished. I knew about guardian angels from TV shows. They are always visions in white gowns with expansive wings who float on beds of cumulus clouds. There was no visual for mine, just a voice that sounded clear and sure, an articulation that permeated the room. I can't contain my fully believe this message has been from an angel. For the first time in my life, I am spilling over with joy. I sprint upstairs to my mother to let her know that we will survive. It is this very message that buttressed me for the next 2 decades of my life. On so many days, when all signs pointed away from my not only thriving but surviving, I remembered the angel's whispers and felt saved. I cannot count how many times I longed to be rescued in my father's homes. The beauty of this one, on its large, tree-lined, and well-manicured lot belied the chaos raging within. You couldn't hear it from the street. Just the day before the angel came, I had been in my room with my sister, in the midst of a stuffed animal caucus, while our brother, John, was in his room, stereo blaring the latest 80s R&B hits. Then I felt my brother's door bang open and the floor shake as he sprinted down the stairs. My sister and I stopped cold and locked eyes. My blood curdled for a terrifying moment. I heard something wooden fall, feet scuffling across the floor downstairs, and a body thrown against a wall. Then my mother's scream, "Stop!" was immediately cut off as she was strangled mute. I had to go downstairs. I had to stop it. I had to help my older brother, who was on his way into the fray. I had to stop my father from killing my mother. Honestly, I don't know what's worse, constructing an image of the brutality in your mind's eye, or actually bearing witness to it. At 7, I didn't have the power to choose. At 7, you attach in the only way you know how. You think you love even the attacker, the one who hurts you and your family. At 7, you blame yourself. In that split second, as I waited, frozen, in terror, I knew only that at any given time, everything I wanted and everything I cherished could be taken from me. I knew that I didn't deserve to be happy because although I couldn't understand what and I couldn't understand how or why, I knew that I must have done something terribly wrong. I knew that I had to run downstairs to save a life. But I couldn't face yet again the terror in which, somehow, I had played a pivotal role. Seconds later, I was on the stairs, my younger sister right behind me. Toward the bottom, she stopped, short, and lost her balance, causing her to accidentally nudge me farther down. I clung to the banister to keep from falling. We stood there, afraid to enter the scene. After summoning my courage, I walked into the kitchen to see my mother standing, alone, bracing herself against the wall. My brother stood in the middle of the room. 2 chairs and a broom were strewn across the floor, and shards of shattered glass were everywhere. My father was gone, and the front door was wide open. "Be careful, girls. Don't step on the glass. Go get shoes." My mother cried out, gasping. My brother walked over to the chairs and began to right them. "Oh my, I've lost my earring, darn!" my mother exclaimed. It was an allowable expletive employed by my grandparents. My mother's parents were Southern, so this was likely the regional variation of darn. "Where in the world is that earring?" my mother continued, acting as if that were the most important detail of the scene we confronted. For her, it was Dot. My sister had already gone upstairs, put on shoes, and was now hard at work peering into every nook and cranny of the kitchen. My mother picked up the broom and began sweeping up the glass. "Careful, kids. Watch where you step. Gosh, I hope I don't sweep up that earring." I, too, retrieved my shoes and returned to help. I went to the open front door and looked outside. There was no one. In keeping with my indoctrination, I closed the door firmly to seal the secrets inside. Within minutes, my sister had found the sapphire stud earring that had rolled under the corner of the oriental rug in the foyer. "My goodness, how did it get over there?" my mother asked. I knew it. Good old Eagle Eyes gets it again. "Thank you, my darling." She plucked the earring from my sister's small palm and gave her a hug. "I'll find another backing. That's less important. I must have an extra upstairs." She put the earring on the counter so she could finish sweeping up the glass. As she bent toward the dustpan, her hair fell forward, and when she brushed it back, I could see red marks on her neck. The nail of her index finger was broken, and the ragged edge was covered in dried blood. She winced a little as the pressure from the dustpan dug into her bruised finger. My brother balled up his fists and silently climbed the stairs. A moment later, I heard him resume listening to his latest vinyl album, Prince's Purple Rain, while my sister sat quivering with my mother in the kitchen. I went into the foyer and sat on the bottom step of the staircase. I waited in the event my father returned. I waited in case my sister cried. I waited for my fluttering heart to be still. I waited even after my mother had put the broom away, retrieved her sapphire earring from the counter, and walked past me to go upstairs to her room. I waited for the discussion our family would never have gotten. Really, what kind of discussion would it have been? Would we have all gathered in the living room, we 3 children on the sofa and a parent seated at either end in antique chairs? If he were to have spoken the truth, here is what my father would have said. "I come from a place of deep shame and self-loathing. I never learned to forgive my parents for abandoning me, so I never learned to love. Instead of taking the time to heal from my past traumas, I chose to distract myself by marrying before I was fit to be in a relationship of any kind. every day, by not making a better choice, the right choice. I choose to tether myself to this dysfunction. Because of this, I have made a choice to continue that cycle of pain and suffering. For this reason, I have decided to rob myself of health and genuine connection. For this same reason, I choose to terrorize you and rob you of any sense of security. And childhood, it won't stop until decades from now, when I finally walk out of your lives. And yes, I know that I am wrong. It's true that I should have committed none of this violence. You will or will not find your own closure as you wish. You will or will not find your own healing as you wish. As for me, I will run from this place. I will hide from myself beneath the cloak of Christianity. I will let these silent compartments of denial and hurt imprison me in this life, that hell is my temple. In turn, my mother would have said the following: I learned in my formative years to be codependent, and so never truly developed the tenor of my own voice. I tell myself I am helping a broken man. What I'm really doing is finding someone to validate my low self-esteem, then imprinting that dysfunction onto the next generation. I fill up this void with fancy, attractive possessions. I found a man who can give us things. Don't you all want nice things? I realize that when you children finally escape this house, you will not know what it means to sleep through the night without fear. You will not know what it means to love from a place of absolute self-possession. It will be up to you later to decide if and how you will learn these skills on your own. As for me, I will allow all this to lay the groundwork for me to live a smaller life than I ever wanted for myself or for my children. I can't face my own pain. I can't face that my inaction to make a better choice, the right choice, has led to the harm of myself and my children. It is true that I should have left, and yet I choose to stay here now in spite of it all. Be well, my children, be well. Here is what I would have said to both of them: speak these truths aloud, for it is only in silence that horror can persist. The courage to call a thing by its true name galvanizes the human spirit to address it. If that condition serves one's desires, it will be embraced with a full heart. If it is destructive to one's path, it will be deliberately dismantled over time. And so it was that instead of facing the truth of our demons, my family went on in silence year after year, our days routinely punctuated by bursts of violence. After an argument over something mundane, who had misplaced the car keys, who would pick up the girls after school, my father threw punches at my mother. Over time, my brother, John, whom my classmates regarded as if he were a part-time print model and part-time professional athlete, grew into a muscular man of 5'10", with the physical power to intervene. My father was just shorter than the average American male, and fat. It was his emotional instability, and not his build, that was intimidating. John would pull my father off my mother, and then the two men would begin to tussle. Once, in my early teenage years, I flung myself into an argument that my father and my brother were having in an effort to protect John, but as I was just 5 feet tall and weighed not even 100 pounds, I grossly misgouged my strength. When a punch careened against my arm, I was thrown back onto the floor. My mother screamed for me to move out of the way, and for my father to stop. John then flipped atop my father to wrestle him into submission, every muscle in his young body pinning the madman to the floor. I scooted back and ran to my room for some type of weapon. Could I use a book or one of my larger troll dolls to pummel my father? What if I missed him and hit my brother? What if that gave the monster the advantage, and then none of us would be safe? Yes, I thought about calling the police, but in that neighborhood, you didn't call the police on your own family. With the final DC home, house number 3, we had arrived on the Gold Coast, areas colloquially referred to as the Gold and Platinum Coasts of Washington, D.C., were so named because they were historically home to Washington's black elite. I landed there in the 4th grade with a new status, at a new private school for girls, the National Cathedral School. Like all elites, we didn't expose our private, upper-middle-class shame to the public sphere. Why would we have? After all, we had worked too hard to get here to risk a crack in the fragile facade that fronted our legitimacy. All elites knew the code: take your pills with your cocktail, use your cosmetics to cover the blemishes and bruises, clean up quickly, whatever it takes so you can present a smiling, perfectly coiffed and clad self to the world. I broke this code of privilege only once. I was a tween when, one Saturday afternoon, I fled the melee in the second-floor master bedroom, where my teenage brother was fighting my father to protect my mother, and as my mother was fighting my father on the periphery to defend my brother, and my sister was somewhere unidentifiable but not visibly in the fray. I ran downstairs to the phone docked on the wall outside the kitchen. Tucked in the dark where no one would see me, I desperately dialed. I heard 911. What is your emergency? I'm at home. We're not safe. My father is hitting my mother. He's fighting with my brother. We're not safe here. I whispered into the phone. Where are you located? The voice asked. I looked around and, with my hand over my mouth, stealthily told them where I was calling from and what was happening. We'll send a unit right out to you. The operator said, Please hurry, I begged before hanging up. I ran upstairs to my parents' room. As my father and brother fought and my mother swatted my father with her shoe, I managed to yell out, I've called the police. They're on their way. This was my leverage. The beating stopped, but the threats continued to fly. My father threatened to have my brother arrested. My mother retorted that she would never allow such a thing and that it was my father who should be arrested. They were still arguing when the doorbell rang. I ran downstairs to open the front door. To mail, DC police officers were standing there. They adjusted their gaze down from the iron grate peephole to see a little girl framed in the doorway. One officer had a hand on his holster. The other officer stood with his arms crossed. As if in stereo, they fired off rounds of questions at me. Asterisk, did anyone here call 911? What seems to be the problem? Is there a disturbance here? We received a call about a domestic dispute. I opened my mouth to reply, but standing on the doorstep looking out into my quiet, placid neighborhood, I found the answers hard, so hard, to utter. I saw the police car parked on the street in front of my house. I wondered if the Frasers, next door, were home. I wondered if Sammy, my crush who lived around the corner, would ride by on his bike and see the police car and me with my side ponytail and favorite striped dress. At least I was well dressed, I thought, for my unexpected guests and any unsuspecting onlookers. Miss, the police officer on the left said, jolting me back to attention, did you call the police? It was as if he had asked me to recite the complete value of pi. I could have given him a basic idea of its beginning, but I had no idea in what order it unfolded and no clue about how it might end. I could feel my breathing accelerates as I thought about what I might say. But then the adults rushed to the door. Whisking me aside, I stood in the corner of the foyer as my mother, brother, and father spoke to the police. As far as I could hear, each of them was frantically interjecting his or her version of the story. Emboldened by the police presence, my sister and I chimed in to corroborate our team's account. The police listened quietly and with little patience. Finally, they said, well, if you all want to stay with your stories, we'll just have to arrest you both, indicating both my father and brother. I could feel my sister's heart sink with my own. How had these officers parsed the blame to dismantle justice in this way? How did my father's account equal the collective account of us? For, how had my call yielded their indifference instead of assistance, which was yet another punishing blow? My mother spoke up right away, her voice filled with dread. No, I don't want my son arrested, and because she couldn't risk my brother being jailed, she then said she didn't want to press any charges against my father, either, and that was the end of the police involvement. The two officers looked at my parents and, without saying anything else, turned and went back to their cruiser. After they left, I realized that there really wasn't anyone we could turn to. There was no law here, no help. When assessing the danger, the police had not differentiated between my father and my brother. They had not asked me or my sister if we were safe. Without so much as a verbal censure to my father, they had simply abandoned a woman and her children to a clear danger in their house. Worse, perhaps, I had broken the code of how good families behave, only to find that traditional avenues would neither protect nor serve me. We never spoke of the 911 call. No one ever mentioned it, and I never dialed those 3 numbers again. When my parents photanned, they continued to I just prayed to my angel that it would all end well one day. And one gorgeous fall day, years later, it did end in a way. Or maybe it is more accurate to say that on that gorgeous fall day too, I was able to see a way out. Years after I called the police, the usual battle was raging as I cowered in my room, contemplating, once again, what I might use as a weapon to protect myself and my family against my father. Then I heard someone leave the house, the door slamming shut. My father had stormed upstairs and thrown clothes in a bag. He then got his car keys and left the house without saying a word, driving away for what all of us hoped would be forever, but collectively knew would be for only a few days. I hesitantly emerged into the hallway. My mother stood there holding my brother's hand. He was bleeding from a deep wound in his left thumb. Our father had bitten him while John had had him pinned to the floor. As my mother ripped the hem of John's frayed shirt to fashion a makeshift tourniquet to stop the bleeding, I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of animal bites a fellow human being, his own son, like this? Amid the chaos, we pressed on with the other versions of our lives. My mother needed to drive my sister to a friend's birthday party. Since I had recently obtained my learner's permit, I volunteered to take my brother to the closest ER we could think of, a 10-minute drive away, in Silver Spring. My mother agreed, and the four of us dispersed in 2 cars. As I drove my burnished tan Corolla, it was hard to avoid staring at the bandaged hand resting in my brother's lap. When we arrived at the hospital, I followed the red arrows to the circular driveway for the emergency department drop-off area. My brother had to reach across his lap with his uninjured hand to liberate himself from the seatbelt before getting out of the car. I watched him start the long walk toward the fluorescent lights beckoning from the ER, and then I drove around to the hospital parking lot. I parked and got out of the car, huddling into my sweater as I took note of the majestic maple and elm trees beside the stoic pines that remained forever green along the path toward the imposing gray high-rise. I belted my sweater and headed inside. In stark contrast to the chill of the bright white UR lights, the hospital entrance was warm and dark. It was quiet inside, and I saw no one walking the shiny linoleum floors. I found my brother in the waiting room filling out some forms, and I took a seat next to him. An older man sat at the other end of the room, his hair disheveled and his skin creased from what even at my young age looked like a lifetime of hard living. He had pulled his heavy brown trench coat over him as he slept in the unyielding waiting room chair, his head bobbing with each big-bellied breath. For long moments at a time, he would stop breathing altogether, and I found myself watching, anxiously, until he took another breath. I figured that, if the next one didn't come, at least he was in an ER. A young man was sitting in a chair toward the middle of the room with his discharge papers, an inhaler, and a bottle of medicine. He kept looking out toward the parking lot, and I gathered he was waiting for a ride. The ER doors slid open, and a father hurried in, carrying his little girl, who had a nasty gash on her leg just below the hem of her purple dress. All of us were there, I realized, because we were damaged in some way, wounded, broken. A few minutes later, my brother was called into the inner recesses of the ER. I watched him disappear into a triage area, and then out of view. I settled in for the wait. Flashing lights and high-pitched beeps pierced the lull, announcing the arrival of an ambulance backing up to the ER doors. The vehicle parked, and then the crew proceeded to unload a portly older man lying on a gurney. A medic held up a bag of fluid that dripped into the man's arm. He secured it to a metal pole and then continued to pump air into a tube that went into the man's mouth. Another medic performed compressions on the man's chest, but the man did not move, save for the intermittent involuntary jerking of his body in time with the thrusts to his chest. At one point, an ashen arm dangled off the gurney as they rushed the patient into the emergency department. Moments later, what appeared to be a family flooded into the waiting room. Women and men came in crying, asking about their father, husband, son. The clerk at the intake desk quietly asked them to wait. I picked up a magazine and tried not to stare as wounded people came in. Nurses arrived to call out names. Patients walked or were wheeled into rooms, and curtains closed around their beds. The wounded little girl, the old man, the family, the whole gamut of life seemed to be converging in this space. All of us sat there waiting, nervously averting our eyes from one another. At one point, a burgundy car pulled up outside, and the young man with the inhaler and discharge papers exclaimed, "Finally, thank God," gathered his belongings, and rushed for the door. The old man, under the overcoat, who I decided must be homeless, continued to sleep. The family members, still crying, eventually were ushered into an interior room. The little girl with the gash on her leg skipped out, hand in hand with her father, wearing a brand new pink band-aid and clutching a lollipop. She was smiling as if she'd just been to the circus. I glanced at my watch. It had been slightly over an hour, and there was still no sign of my brother. Later, the family of the man who'd arrived by ambulance came out one by one, arm in arm, shaking their heads and wringing their hands. As they headed out into the night, there was talk of arrangements and who would call Aunt Jo. Now, it was just me and the sleeper. Dusk set in as I continued to wait. Finally, my brother emerged, his hand bandaged in thick white gauze. He was ready to go. "How is everything?" I asked. "Fine. They just did an X-ray and cleaned it up. I have to have it checked in a couple of days to make sure it's healing all right. They said something about how they could only put a couple of stitches since it's a bad bite wound, and I have to take these antibiotics." As my brother and I left the ER, I marveled at the place, one of bright lights and dark hallways, place so quiet and yet so throbbing with life. I marveled at how a little girl could be carried and cut and crying and then skip out laughing, at how a bloodied brother could reappear with stitches in his repaired hand, at how the family of a man who had presumably been fine that morning could manage to leave without him, to start a new stage of their lives, one in which he would play no part, at how the man without a home could find somewhere to rest until he, too, would have to go back outside to figure out the rest of his day, the rest of his life, at how all of us had converged in these hallowed halls for a chance to reveal our wounds, to offer up our hurt and our pain to be eased. If my brother's BAFTA could be patched up, then certainly, in its own time, his spirit could mend, too. If we looked, if we named the problem, identified and examined it, then there was the opportunity to fix it. The chance for us to walk out under the stoic pines healed, or on our way to being so. On the drive home, my brother and I assumed our usual silence. The city at dusk was cloaked in shadows, and the full moon played mischief among the clouds. I pulled my Toyota into our driveway behind my mother's Lincoln Town car and alongside my brother's sports car. We went into the house, and John headed up to his room and turned on his music, this time A Tribe Called Quest. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of orange juice, then sat at the kitchen table and thought about how I wanted to leave this haunted house and fix people. I figured that if I could find stillness in this chaos, if I could find love beyond this violence, if I could heal these layers of wounds, then I would be the doctor in my own emergency room. That would be my offering to the world, to myself. Unlike in the war zone that was my childhood, I would be in control of that space, providing relief, or at least a reprieve to those who called out for help. I would see to it that there was shelter, in the spaces of which I was the guardian. The formless angel with a voice as clear as my own had told me the secret many years ago. Let it be so. Chapter 2, Dr. Harper, The View from Here. It wasn't at all how I had pictured graduation from my emergency medicine residency at Mercy Hospital in the South Bronx would be, but it certainly was a blistering end. I sat near the aisle, next to my mother, who was next to my stepfather. I had told my brother and sister not to bother with the trip. I figured my sister would be busy with her obligations as an Army lieutenant. I assumed that my brother would be preoccupied with his family, or with landscaping his new home. That's what I told myself. The truth was closer to my not wanting them to see me like this. I didn't want witnesses there to confirm that this had really happened, that this celebration I had looked forward to for the last 4 years of medical school, and then during the 4 years of residency, felt more like a funeral. There was a noticeable absence by my side, where I had always imagined my husband would have stood. Husband, the word cut like a slur. Husband was more accurate. The last time I spent time with Dan was in May, in our 1,200 square foot, 2-bedroom pre-war cope in the South Bronx. Our marriage was unmistakably over, but we had continued cohabitating because my move to Pennsylvania was still more than 1 month away. Just after graduation, neither Dan nor I had the money for another place at that time, with the sale of our co-op still pending. We had previously settled on Philadelphia. Our families were in the Northeast, and we were Northeasterners at heart. New York City was too expensive, anything north of New York was too cold, and anything south of D.C. was no longer the North. Most of New Jersey was far too suburban, and the parts that offered big city comforts were just as expensive as New York City. This had left only Philadelphia, which had easy access to New York, D.C., New Jersey, and Maryland, and had a reasonable cost of living compared to its competition. Neither one of us had ever lived there, but it seemed to make the most sense on paper. I didn't know anyone in Philadelphia, but Dan's parents had just moved to one of its bedroom communities, and he had a couple of friends who lived nearby. Had deferred every other decision until after my residency, when one member of a couple is in residency. The couple is in residency, but now all that would change. In our new city, I had imagined we would walk over cobblestone streets hand in hand. Ginkgo leaves would waft gently onto the sidewalks as we passed. We'd try all the new restaurants because we'd finally be able to afford them. I couldn't wait to advertise all our starter IKEA furniture on Craigslist and purchase the type of furniture an adult woman actually wanted to pack up and take with her when she relocated. Our home's style would be a mix of elegant and eco-industrial. We'd burn candles all the time, vanilla and spiced amber to start. We'd finally have placemats, napkins, and sleek new flatware. We'd wander the city museums on Wednesdays and host dinner parties on Fridays. We'd enjoy our discretionary income, and then, after a couple of years, we could discuss having kids. So our split could have been a scene from a terrible indie film, the one where the perfect, young, progressive New York City couple, the white, independent filmmaker husband and the black physician wife who had met at Harvard's freshman ice cream social, endure a shocking, painful breakup. The couple has already overcome so much when, only months before she graduates from her residency, with a planned move to Philadelphia to be near his friends and family, he lowers the boom. "You're doing well in your career, and I'm not," he told me that night. "If I'm with you, I'll focus on your success. I have to find myself. The only way I can do that is if I'm not with you. You'll be fine in Philadelphia." I can't go. It felt like a cliché, a plot point that everybody else but the main characters themselves sees coming. I knew what would happen next in the movie. It would start raining outside first, a drizzle, and then a torrential downpour. As Whitney Houston crooned "I Will Always Love You," as the music grew louder, I would rest my head on his shoulder. Then, as the song reached its crescendo, my heart would break. In real life, 48 hours after his declaration, I found an attorney and filed for divorce. We had talked until 3 o'clock in the morning, our words alternating between clench-fisted blame and gut-wrenching pleas. We had paced miles in that bedroom until our bodies broke from fatigue. Finally, we had collapsed into bed. I tossed and turned the rest of the night away, unable to dispel the slideshow of snapshots that was our story. Well, my version of our story. I knew that time would fade each image to a hazy déjà vu. I begged the universe to make me remember our cheesy romantic dancing in the rain on a temperate April afternoon 9 years before. Our special Queen's hummus recipe we had, concocted from a handful of Food Network recipes and whatever happened to be our flavor preference of the week. Our road trips to the Jersey Shore. His touch, which was smooth and soft in the way of a person whose work is more cognitive than physical. The brown pools of his eyes that told me that beneath his athletic build, he was fragile. And every second of the 13 years we had shared, I begged the universe to make our breakup feel fair or right, and to let me survive. I had attempted to soothe myself by crawling up close and snuggling into him. I lay there in the nook made by his arms, timing my breath to the heavy breath of his sleep, the rhythmic calm of his presence. Dan had always had this gift. He could sleep anytime, anywhere. His sculpted body felt supple as the muscles softened in slumber, providing the perfect cushion for bite-sized me. I'm still amazed at how the body yields when it relaxes. I don't know if it was because, in true Iron Chef fashion, he frequently whipped up fresh Italian dishes with whatever ingredients were on hand, or because of his long days running around the New York City streets for his film shoots. But that night, Don smelled like a mixture of warm bread and grass. I inhaled deeply, as if it were the most precious breath I would ever take. I felt as if I were levitating there, as if in a hot air balloon going up, up. I wanted so badly to come down, to snuggle closer, but there was a rampart of air, of breath, between us. I looked over the edge of the balloon's wicker basket and waved goodbye to this place. I thought of our earlier plan, before we knew we were breaking up, to rent out the coop as an investment property when we moved to Philadelphia, until the real estate market swelled to secure us a hefty sale price. It was our surefire way to get rich, we had mused. As the balloon kept rising, I panned the landscape to catch a glimpse of my in-laws and silently bade them goodbye, too. It had taken them nearly a decade to become comfortable with their baby boy dating a black woman, with their having a black daughter, and in the end, it was worth it. Our bond had weathered strong. The thought of my relocating to their area without their son made the pang of my move that much more acute. I said my farewells, to the two beautiful, olive-skinned children Dan and I might have had. I could still feel the curls that framed their cherubic cheeks. which had my dimples. Their Italian-American and African-American heritages would have blessed them with lean and muscular bodies and round, ample butts. She would have been Nella Vita, and he would have been August. I could hear their giggles and their bye-byes dissolving into shrieks and cries. I tried to hold on to their images, but the balloon was drifting too high, and I was receding from them, and my in-laws and the apartment and everything else I had known for the past 13 years. Now the balloon was up, too far for me to jump down. The air felt thin at this altitude, and the only bubble of oxygen was right there on my ex-husband's chest and neck. My eyes traced his every contour, the mandible, the clavicle, the iliac crest, because I knew it would be the last time. I knew that at some point he would wake up, and I would have to move. Trembling, I fumbled for my phone to snap one last picture of him asleep in bed. It was a terrible photo. The image was blurry and, in the low light, I couldn't help but laugh, anticipating his response when I showed it to him after he woken less. Of course, I simply deleted it. Soon, a sticky New York City spring morning dawned. Sunrise oozed through the blinds and sketched a pattern on Dan's left cheek. I peeled the sheet back to feel the shallow breeze of the fan as it fought a pathetic battle against the humidity. And I thought about my next step. I would fall apart. Part of it would be due to loneliness, and a greater part would be the loss of what had been, up to that point, the only relatively stable relationship I had ever had with a man. I wasn't angry the marriage was over. I wasn't bitter. I knew that we had run our course. Our breakup had never really been about the moving. It had been about two people at a crossroads. Don wanted to live abroad to study his craft, knowing full well that I couldn't move after my residency. I needed to start working and to pass my board certification examination. He knew that I was not the type of woman to kamikaze my career for a man. I was also not the type of woman to stand in the way of another person's path. For Dan's part, he would leave because he had to, and I would let him go because there was no question that I had to. No. The sadness on its way was over something greater than loneliness or losing a man. The breakup of my marriage was stoking in me the deep sense of abandonment that had lain dormant during my marriage, the loss of the home life I had craved but never had. I knew on some level that this was the real source of my grief. I didn't know the details yet, how or when, but that New York City spring, I knew it wouldn't be long before I slipped into a well of despondence, one where there was neither color nor light, but where, goddess willing, there was a bottom. I knew, too, that there would be no fighting any of it, now. Here at my final residency ceremony, I shifted in my seat and glanced at my mother as she proudly anticipated my name being called. I concentrated on the rhythmic tapping of my heel. Just a few minutes more in this auditorium, and I could start the business of moving on. I was careful not to kick the stranger beside me, to make the tapping fine and swift so it wouldn't bother anyone but could still distract me. I looked down at my ring finger. I could still see the light tan mark where my wedding band had been, the skin around it darkened by the sun. I quickly rubbed my index finger over the area. I rubbed it to take away the pain, and I kept rubbing, hard, as a single errant tear seared my right cheek. The strategy wasn't working. Every graduation had sucked in its own way. High school graduation had sucked the least. The ceremony itself was ravelrous. My whole family attended, no great feat, given that my family is small. Grandma showed up in one of her lacy church hats, which was nicely complemented by her deep berry lipstick. Grandpa, taciturn and smiling, was there in a smart suit, his camera, as always, by his side. He was the family photographer and the consummate observer. Grandma was the matriarch and the voice for them both. My mother's favorite sister Eileen was there, and my parents, my brother, and my sister, cheering with the rest of those gathered at the commencement for the National Cathedral School. The feeling of being surrounded by my fellow classmates, 66 other young women, many of whom would undoubtedly alter the course of history in critical ways, gave me unparalleled pride. So, high school graduation itself wasn't bad. Leaving my family home for college was the bittersweet bit. The place was all I had known as a little girl, and yet nearly everything about it had been wrong. As I packed, listening to Delight on my CD player, I took with me my inner child, the girl I was, who had never been permitted to come out to explore and be fanciful and weightless. Tucked into a small box, I carried her on the long drive to Cambridge, Massachusetts, because outside of the Orchid Street walls she might finally find a playground. I won't go into detail about my college experience. Much has been written about centers of elitism and privilege like Harvard University. Some of it is true. It is true that at one of the first social events at Harvard I attended, a white male classmate told me that I couldn't possibly be black because I didn't speak like the two black people he knew from his neighborhood, and since he was clearly the arbiter of blackness, he felt he had the right to say that to me. What I didn't know at the time was that this would be a fitting introduction to the 4 years of macroaggressions to follow. It is true that when a student sexual violence prevention group I was a part of approached one of the deans with a multi-point plan, her response to our inquiry to centralize resources for rape victims was, "Harvard doesn't hold your hand." She meant it. In less than the time it took for her to close her door, the discussion was over. It is true that when I heard of the scandal of wealthy people literally purchasing their children's admissions into these universities, I wasn't surprised. This rampant inequity was well known to all of us who were there. The only thing bizarre about the story was that the public behaved as if they weren't aware. While these ivory towers have traditionally served to elevate those who already have unearned privilege, they may hinder those who do not, by virtue of immutable attributes such as color, family, class, sexual orientation, gender, and physical ability. The increased scrutiny on these institutions to live up to the standards of conduct that they profess to exemplify is warranted. As for the graduation ceremony itself, suffice it to say that various people gave speeches and I skipped the majority of the events. It was my graduation from medical school that was a complete derealization. It wasn't just that my grandparents were no longer able to travel. My grandmother had developed advanced Alzheimer's, and my grandfather had stayed at home to care for the woman who had always anchored his world, but that Maurice, my biological father, attended. He had been at all the graduations that came before, and it had been awkward each and every time. Up to that point, he had helped pay for my education, so I had felt obligated to extend the invitation. I didn't yet know that I had the power to choose. By the time I entered medical school, my parents had been divorced several years, which had made my conversations with my father sporadic and forced. I watched Maurice shake hands with my instructors and tuned out his recounting of the nurturing fathering that he didn't do. As we posed for family photos, attention in me snapped. Each camera flash documented that the charade my family had always been was now publicly foisted onto this next stage of my life, where it was neither welcome nor tolerable. Soon after I finished medical school, Dan and I got married. I had promised my mother I wouldn't get married until after I'd earned my medical degree. As she had told me many times, she wanted me to own my degree all by myself. I had decided not to invite Maurice to the marriage celebration. In fact, he didn't even know about it. Not long after, he let me know that he no longer wanted to be a part of my life. This was during one of the many phone conversations he coerced from me, asserting some type of genetic imperative to maintain a connection to one's family. When that failed, he'd try to control me with threats to withdraw financial support. When that failed, I decided that accepting his money came at far too high a cost. The coercion stopped. As far as I was concerned, the title of father had to be earned, and I began to define family for myself, concluding that inclusion in this group could be forfeited. I cut these cords to support myself. I knew by then that it was only from that space that I could make my own assessments. It was only then that I could finally confront him about his abusive behavior. I told him that he had been a terrorist in our family, that he had so profoundly ruined some of its members' lives that they struggled with substance abuse, that my mother still flinched at loud noises. I told him that if he ever wanted to communicate with me again, he would first have to acknowledge the truth of who he was. Instead of admitting that any of what I'd said had even occurred, he vanished. He made his choice. It is better to be left with a ghost than a ghoul, so his disappearance from my life was an acceptable outcome. There was no graduation from my internship, just an escape. My 4-year emergency medicine program required that I complete my intern year, postgraduate year 1 of residency in another field before returning to complete years 2 through 4 in the ER. The thinking in the profession at the time was that it was too tough to start off in the ER fresh out of medical school, that it was better to get a year of training under your belt in another medical discipline first. Figuring it would give me a well-rounded foundation for my practice in emergency medicine, I elected to spend my intern year in internal medicine. I almost didn't care where I completed that first year. For me, it was simply a 365-day means to an end. Still, I decided to diminish the pain by choosing a program with the relatively higher pay and other creature comforts a wealthy hospital affords. I therefore dutifully completed that year in a prosperous area of Long Island, at a hospital where, upon entering each day, I was greeted with a classical selection from the pianist seated at the grand piano in the lobby, or from a serenading harpist. I had not anticipated that even this would not quell my longing every single day for my next medical home, in the Bronx. Internship is the year of residency that nearly everyone in medicine programs hates. Whether it was other prelims like me, who counted down the minutes until we arrived at our primary program, or the sad souls who hadn't yet been matched with a residency program but who had accepted the position in the hope that it would buy them some time as they scrambled to reapply to a residency, or the folks who actually wanted to practice internal medicine and so swallowed the bitter pill of the first year and accepted its drudgery as conventional hazing we were. After all, the scut slaves of the hospital, the first to be paged for everything, we ran around chasing electrolyte levels, refilling Tylenol orders, and preparing morning presentations, just a fraction of the duties we performed on minimal sleep. The internal medicine program director I worked under, Dr. J, was a forceful character. She was intelligent and skilled clinically, but not particularly nice. As we interns gathered for rounds, the morning ritual where we visited patients to check on their progress, we always knew when she was approaching by the click-clack of her shoes on the linoleum. She matched her sensible yet stylish kitten heels with jewel-toned suits that always seemed to be at least one size too large for her petite frame. One summer morning, after I had been on call the night before, we would be starting with my presentation of patients' signs and symptoms, followed by the prescribed evaluation and treatment plans for anyone I had admitted overnight, at which point I could go home to rest while the others on the team continued with rounds. The day before, Dr. Jaiswal had reamed out Helen, another one of the prelims, for her presentation on pneumonia, and Craig for his feeble attempt to present a patient with thrombocytopenia, low platelet count, in view of everyone in the vicinity of the doctor stations where we were rounding. Everyone feared Dr. Jaiswal, harboring a resentment toward her that bordered on hate. In the resident lounge, the comments made about her were brutal, and we complained incessantly to one another about how overly critical she was and how stingy with positive feedback. While Dr. Jaiswal was less than forgiving of careless intern error, I had to admit that she was probably on point with her criticisms of Helen and Craig. Their presentations had been weak, and in her defense, she could tell you everything about her patients. For example, Dr. Jaiswal knew that Mr. Jones, who had been brought to the hospital in multi-organ failure, had suffered a botched knee replacement 5 years earlier. Fearing another bad hospital experience, he waited at home for 3 weeks with increasing knee pain and swelling, before he allowed his family to call EMS to transport him to the ER for his septic joint. Also, she was a good diagnostician, and had even spotted in one patient acute intermittent porphyria, a disease rarely ever considered outside Discovery Health Channel's mystery diagnosis, or the movie The Madness of King George. And though she was brusque, if you could absorb her example, you had every chance of becoming a phenomenal clinician. Tenderness would have to be learned elsewhere. On that uncomfortable summer morning in my first month of intern year, it was my turn. As our medical team headed to my patient's room, I felt myself getting lightheaded from a mix of sleep deprivation and fear. The walk from the 5th floor felt like a sprint. We were already on the 7th floor, as if by time travel, had we gotten on an elevator. I shuffled my papers, willing myself to remember everything I had learned about the patient the night before. Dr. Jaiswal berated us if we glanced down at our notes during a presentation. Her logic: if we couldn't retain the information on a couple of patients at a time, then we had chosen the wrong field. Nervously, I reminded myself of what I knew. The patient had a history of high cholesterol and hypertension. He was on no medications other than Crestor for his cholesterol. So, Michelle, Dr. Jaiswal said to me as we made our way to his room, "I hear you enjoyed a quiet evening. How lucky for you. Only one admission for us this morning. Well, we'll make the most of it." She smiled, baring even, white teeth behind matte crimson lips. She always wore red lipstick, and the hue seemed to amplify her every word. Quiet. Had she just used the word quiet? When I'd walked into the hospital last night, it was as if I were walking the plank. Just 3 other interns and I were covering the ward, and I felt the usual dread of holding other people's lives in my not yet capable hands. 2 of my patients spiked fevers, one became hypoxic, one had chest pain. and another went into a rapid heart rate, which made me go into an even faster arrhythmia. There was nothing about the evening that had felt quiet, and now I didn't feel lucky either. We reached the door to the patient's room and gathered around. I cleared my throat and began to present. Mr. Frame is oh no, Dr. Jaiswal said. Let's go in. Let us see the patient. Very important to actually go to the bedside and see the patient you are caring for. Assessment starts. At first glance, she couldn't be serious. Not only did I have to present to Dr. Jaiswal after I had been up all night, but I had to do so in front of the patient. As Dr. Jaiswal ushered the team inside the room, there was no time for me to anticipate the myriad ways this could all go terribly wrong. With a swiping motion of her finger, she indicated where each of us, obedient sheep that we were, should stand around the bed. Good morning, Mr. Frame, she said to the patient. I'm Dr. Jaiswal, the head of the medicine team who will be taking care of you. I hope you don't mind that we will be discussing your care right here with you. Not at all. Nice to meet you all, Mr. Frame responded. He was a nondescript, middle-aged white man with dark hair and a medium build. The spotlight of my having to discuss him to my supervising physician at his bedside gave him a new level of distinction. Hello, again, I said, nodding to the patient. Then I began anew. Mr. Frame is a 59-year-old male with a history of hypertension and high cholesterol, with a chief complaint of worsening fevers, chills, cough, and nausea, who was admitted with a liver abscess. He had been treated for this with 2 courses of antibiotics before coming to us. He completed a 10-day course of Augmentin, and then his primary care provider changed him to a course of clindamycin. He was on day 7 of 10 when he presented last night. Dr. Harper. This already sounds very strange. Who was treating him? Dr. Jaiswal asked. His primary care provider. Just his primary care provider. Huh, and what was he being treated for? As I understand it, it was for a liver abscess, until his doctor sent him into the hospital last night. In my mind, I scrolled through my notes, but I feared they wouldn't help. I didn't know. I hadn't adequately reasoned through the case. Yes. I seem to remember that it was only his primary care provider who had been treating him before he came in last evening. Does that strike you as odd? Why would his primary care provider take this course of action to treat him, as a sole provider, with only oral antibiotics for a liver abscess? There's something missing here. Something missing in the history. It simply doesn't make sense. Dr. Jaiswal paused, as if to give me space for an impossible redemption. I could hear each intern's bated breath, and the rustle of Mr. Frame's crisp white hospital sheets as he shifted in bed. The air was humid and stale with the smell of half-eaten toast from the breakfast tray at the foot of his roommate's bed. In the hallway, nurses opened and closed cabinet drawers for the morning medication administration. The housekeeping staff knocked on doors asking permission to clear trash. Against the backdrop of this din, I stood in the cramped room in front of a ring of interns and our resident, floundering for answers I didn't have. Finally, I spoke. Well, the patient had a fever with his infection and continued to have fevers through the Augmentin, so the physician changed him to clindamycin. What testing had been done prior to his presentation? She asked. As I gathered from his history, lab, and radiology results the patient brought with him, his primary care doctor had completed blood work consisting of a CBC complete, blood count, basic metabolic panel, blood cultures, and also a chest X-ray. There was a persistent elevation in his white count and a small pleural effusion on the chest X-ray. Dr. Jaiswal grimaced. Hung, Dr. Harper, you are clearly missing some critical information as well as basic medical knowledge, which has degraded your presentation and assessment. Here, proceed for now, and we will get back to it, she directed. I shook off my terror and continued. Chest CT in the ER last night demonstrated a pleural effusion as well as a collection in the liver. A dedicated CT of his abdomen and pelvis was pursued to further evaluate this finding, which revealed his hepatic abscess. Yes, now it's making more sense, Dr. Jaiswal stated. Sounds like there was no diagnosis apart from fever of unknown, or at least unclear etiology, and some non-specific small pleural effusion found on a chest X-ray as the PCP worked up the patient. Due to Mr. Frame's worsening clinical status on antibiotics, his physician appropriately referred him to the ER for advanced evaluation and treatment that could not be offered in an outpatient setting. Upon arrival to the ER, they completed a series of CAT scans that revealed Mr. Frame's final diagnosis of hepatic abscess. In keeping with the guidelines for the management of this type of hepatic abscess, it will require drainage in addition to antibiotics to ensure proper treatment, she said, giving me a curt nod signaling that because I obviously lacked the proper medical deductive reasoning, she would make the patient presentation herself. Then, turning to the patient, she said, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Frame. We will be speaking with interventional radiology today to coordinate the drainage of your infection. Of course, there is more testing we will need to do as well while we continue your treatment. There will be many more people by 2CU providers from the departments of radiology, infectious disease, gastroenterology, and of course, the general internal medicine team." She smiled at Mr. Frame the way a person who has everything under her control would, as if to say that nothing could go wrong because a benevolent captain was in command of the ship. She turned back to me. "Thank you, Dr. Harper. You can go home to rest up for tonight. Make sure to read about how to take a history, the workup of fever of unknown origin, as well as the presentation, evaluation, and treatment of hepatic abscess. Ideally, these are things you would do before rounds. Thank you again. I'm sure we all learned a great deal from your presentation." "Yes, of course, Dr. Jaiswell." With that, she pivoted on her kitten heels and walked out of the room. One by one, the interns followed, a trail of white coats shuffling behind trying to keep up. One intern tripped on the feet of the one in front of her. I slinked out of the room, wishing desperately that I could vaporize. That morning I went home and napped away the day. I never forgot that encounter. For the entire intern year, I made sure to ask too many questions of my patients. After all, it was the clinician's job to get the history. Sure, the patient had to answer questions honestly in order for this to work. But I was the detective, so I needed to know what I was looking for and where to look for it. To the best of my ability, I not only read about the topics I didn't understand, I also read around them. I reviewed the history in my head and practiced my assessment and plan, making sure the reasoning led to a logical conclusion. And if I felt that I didn't have all the information from a patient, I went back as many times as required to make sure I got it. Each case was a story, and the story had to make sense. That was the last time I was unprepared for Dr. Jaiswell's rounds. What's important was that in that very long year, she helped me become a better doctor because I saw the good in her, in the value she placed on meticulous preparation and critical thinking. The other parts, the parts that were derogatory and cruel, I made up my mind to ignore. All of it, the rough and the smooth, was crucial for my development as a doctor. I later realized that even with its excruciating challenges, this intern year prepared me best for the transition from my former life to my life after residency and my divorce. Dr. Michele Harper, my residency program director, had called my name, breaking my trance. My final graduation. I don't remember what I wore to the ceremony, or who spoke, but I vividly remember how eternally grateful I was for the power to compose myself in the 7 seconds it took me to stand and walk to the podium. I claimed my diploma and took the obligatory photos before dissolving into tears. I knew how to compartmentalize my family dysfunction, and my stint in medical school had given me a lot of practice. I didn't have time to grieve for my marriage or for the future my ex-husband and I would never share. I had to pack, move, unpack, coordinate a divorce and the sale of our coupe, and start a new job in a new city, alone. I hadn't even considered the new life part. Thank goodness for that convenient oversight. If I had stopped to consider that, for even one moment, I don't know how I would have gotten into the Ford Explorer Don and I shared. It would be returned to him, as it had been a gift from his family to make the drive to Philly. I don't remember much else about my residency graduation because I was striving so hard to let go of that future and struggling to understand that another was already underway. I'd signed a lease for an apartment in one of the upscale buildings in Center City, within walking distance of the hospital where I was to work. The doorman called you by name and asked how your day was going. The elevators ascended silently at warp speed. My 35th floor unit was absolutely tranquil, and I had floor-to-ceiling windows that let in waterfalls of light. I hoped these fancy things might fill the void inside me currently inhabited by pain. For my first night there, I had an air mattress, 6 boxes of clothing, 2 boxes of kitchenware, and my computer. One possessed little else materially. The one item I had taken from our cope in the South Bronx was a large mirror. I asked Don to send 2 items that had been gifts to us, a woven basket from Kenya and a framed photograph of a woman standing at a bus stop in front of the Shepherd Ferry Barack Obama Hope poster. He agreed, but I knew he wouldn't send them, and I couldn't muster the energy to mount any significant protest. They would be just 2 more parts of a past I had lost. On one of my first days in the new apartment, I sat for hours on the living room carpet staring out the windows. I could see the signs and facades of neighboring businesses, many of which were owned by my new employer. Unfortunately, the neon sign announcing Andrew Johnson Hospital was the biggest during the day and shone brightest during the night. It wasn't reassuring then, and as it turned out, that wouldn't change. Still, I could just make out a corner of the Schuylkill River snaking along the horizon, which offered a calming contrast to the cityscape. The particulate matter of memory, heavy and unrefined, filled the room. I inhaled it, letting it abrade the back of my throat and sting my eyes. I lifted my chin into peak June sunlight. Closing my eyes, I leaned into the gold, orange, and red behind my eyelids. I was drawn to it, like a plant. I felt my skin baking. I felt the crackle of the heat, but I didn't flinch. I was finally feeling something. I didn't know what existed, beyond the window, beyond the door to my apartment. I didn't know myself in this place. I didn't know what I would be. I fancied that all things happened for a reason, so there had to be a reason. I had been stripped to my core and was sitting here on a warm carpet, in the blazing reflected light of an unknown city. In a couple of days, I would unpack these boxes, Dan, crisped green scrubs, and go to work. Sometime soon, I'd figure out the rest. But now, I just had to be broken. There wasn't energy for much else. A cloud breezed by, offering a moment's respite from the heat. Thank the goddess for those windows, for the light, for the silence. Thank the goddess for the view from 35 stories up. I didn't yet recognize anything I saw from that height, but it offered a critical distance, a life-saving perspective. Chapter 3. Baby doe, born perfect. Night shifts are always inconvenient, and much like hangovers, the older you get, the harder they are to recover from. For some, they are a badge of honor. Those types sprint them like marathons, race after race, year after year, with the stamina of a long-distance runner. The nocturnists, the hospital-based physicians who are scheduled to work the night shift exclusively, are the strong and brave among us. The goddess forever blesses them because they allow the rest of us to dwell largely in the light. While night shifts are a brutal subjugation of my natural diurnal instincts, I prefer to conduct my life during the day and sleep at night. Have to admit that sometimes they're a refuge. Sometimes it's nice to leave the distractions of the daytime and let myself be swallowed whole by the night. I don't have to respond to emails, or make phone calls, or schedule meetings, or do much of anything else when I'm working in the emergency room at night. In this way, it's a nice break from my administrative work. Don't get me wrong, I signed up for admin. It was my habit, my well-worn groove. I wasn't comfortable if I wasn't in a leadership role. It was a routine I leaned into. After all, back in the early 1990s, I had started a club I called Future Doctors of America at my high school, although at the time, I wasn't entirely sure I wouldn't be an architect or an attorney instead. I was student government president. My senior year co-chaired our local branch of the American Medical Women's Association while in medical school, and was a chief resident my final year in residency. Naturally, I thought I wanted to continue in leadership roles in the hospital while I worked as an attending ER physician. So, here I was, at Philadelphia's Andrew Johnson Hospital, a large teaching institution where I would have to prove myself. I started small, as the director of performance improvement in the emergency department. It was fascinating reviewing cases to investigate potential clinical errors, cases where, for example, a doctor or nurse practitioner, each called a provider, in healthcare lingo, had made an inaccurate diagnosis or prescribed suboptimal treatment. These cases were typically referred to me based on grievances about patient care in the emergency department made by physicians in other hospital departments, by the hospital legal department, or by patients. Initially, I enjoyed the detective work involved in uncovering subtle system failures. It quickly became clear to me, however, that no matter how deferentially I approached my colleagues on these matters, they were not thrilled to hear from me. A physician who has made a mistake, a procedural misstep, never wants to hear the doctor in charge of case review ask him, "Remember the case?" While I had gotten over the need to be liked or feel externally validated sometime before, it was still unpleasant to be received like the in-law you are obligated to speak to at Thanksgiving dinner, despite not really wanting to. But while working nights in the ed, I found all of that melting away. In preparation for those shifts, I take off my administrative hat, close my laptop, and silence my phone. During night tours, I am able to budget time for one morning activity, plus sleep, before heading back to work again. I choose carefully what will occupy this prized morning slot. On a beautiful morning in late summer, I might have my pick of the most succulent blueberries and the most verdant kale at the farmer's market. But I usually head straight to the gym. All the 9-to-5ers are on their way to the office by the time I get there, and anybody who isn't working is still making their first cup of coffee. So I can enjoy the gym in peace, just me and the 80-year-old man who seems never to leave. When I'm done, I go home to a cup of sleepy time tea and the most indulgent nap on the softest, cotton candy pink organic sheets. When else can an adult intentionally sleep the day away and be called responsible for doing so? Later, at 4:30 p.m., the alarm on my phone will chirp, and it will be time to get up as my next night shift begins. I'll walk through the hospital doors just before 7 p.m., in time to see the big smile on the face of the doctor at the end of the day shift. Things always start the same way. I consult the sign out, a list of the outstanding tasks the day physician couldn't resolve during her time on, and begin digging myself out of a hole. It never matters if the list contains 2 items or 10. It always feels like too many given the inevitable backup of patients currently waiting to be seen and the steady influx of new patients arriving over the course of the next 12 hours. On one particular evening, I was the sole physician in the ED and was sharing the shift with the night nurses, Crystal and Deb. It's always a blessing to have a strong and amusing team when you're on nights. When everything is stripped to bare bones, it's a boon to have a sturdy foundation. I notice that the nurse Pam is on, too, and I tell myself that you can't expect everyone on the team to be great. Pam is reasonably intelligent, but her clinical insight is often hampered by a bizarre emotional instability. I couldn't figure out how she'd ended up in emergency medicine, but why she hadn't been fired was obvious. Pam was committed to nights. The committed night crew is untouchable. Hospitals need them to reliably absorb the burden of the shifts other nurses don't want to do. We chugged along uneventfully until around 1 a.m., at which point we heard an ambulance backing into the ambulance bay. Then, EMS rolled in a cage, our abbreviation for heart failure, patients puffing away on a portable BiPAP, Belleville positive airway pressure machine. A plump elderly woman dressed in what looked like a housecoat lay on the gurney. The nurses established intravenous lines and informed the woman that they wanted to administer the medication Lasix into her vein to help her urinate, the extra fluid backing up into her lungs. As the respiratory tech switched her over to the hospital's BiPAP face mask to help her breathe, I leaned over and asked her, in a voice raised just enough to overcome the blowing of the BiPAP machine, but not quite approximating a yell, "Ms. Yang, how are you feeling?" She smiled behind the mask as the forced air made her cheeks flap, then flashed a thumbs up to let me know she was improving. Her EKG and physical exam indicated that her heart was stable, so we were on autopilot for now. The EMS team headed back out the door, and then one of the EMTs returned to give us a heads up that we might be getting a pediatric code. He said he had been listening to the radio and had heard a call about a baby not breathing, and he wanted to alert us in case it was coming our way. I certainly hope not. "Last thing I need in the middle of the night," Pam said, loud enough for all 12 beds in the ER to hear. My physician assistant had just left. There were 6 patients in the ER. 1 had just been brought in, and 3 more were in the waiting room. So the news of the baby wasn't something I was enthusiastic about either. The truth is, there is never a good time for a pediatric code. When an adult gets sick, we can reason about how or why. After all, Grandpa has to die of something, and if Dad binge drank every week for the past 40 years, we're not shocked when his liver fails. If Mom was a diabetic who loved to smoke, we understand when she has a heart attack. Even in cases of seemingly random illnesses, such as breast cancer in a 36-year-old man, while these are painful and difficult to absorb, we can concoct for ourselves a kind of piecemeal comprehension to get through somehow. But when a child is brought in with a critical illness, such as cancer or organ failure, we experience a different kind of suffering, because we see them as both innocent and invincible, too young to justify the affliction, and certainly too perfect to succumb to it. It is that much harder to wrestle with. I moved on to Mr. Nunez, in bed 3, while I awaited Ms. Yang's test results. Depending on her labs, I would admit her to a regular floor bed with heart monitoring, or to the cardiac intensive care unit for her CHF exacerbation. While I assisted the tech in splinting, Mr. Nunez, who had come in with a wrist fracture, the alert came through. Pediatric code blue. ETA 5 minutes. Pediatric code blue. ETA 5 minutes. I knew it was too much to hope for, that we'd be spared. I asked Crystal to place Mr. Nunez in a sling, and quickly printed his discharge papers. Deb's phone rang. One of the medics was calling with an update, a benefit of having someone on shift who is friends with a local paramedic. Doc, neonate, not breathing, Deb said when she got off the phone. They coded in the field 10 minutes, couldn't intubate, but have IV access, they'll be here any minute. Ms. Yang, the CHF patient, was doing well. A quick look at the computer revealed that her labs were coming back normal. It was likely that she hadn't had a heart attack, just a serious flare-up of her congestive heart failure. I asked the clerk, Wendy, to call the hospitalist, the doctor overseeing the medical admissions for the shift, and put the patient's name in for a bed. We needed to admit her immediately to clear the decks. There was no telling how long a baby code would take. I took a quick inventory of the status of the remaining patients. Mr. Nunez was going home. The 3 waiting room patients had normal vital signs with no life-threatening complaints, so they could wait. 2 patients had already been admitted to the hospital and were just waiting for beds to open up. 2 more patients were waiting to go to radiology for CT scans. Okay, let's prep the resuscitation room, I said, heading there with my crew of nurses. Crystal, can you please make sure we have suction? Make sure the code cart is at bedside. Let's bring out the neonate tray. And let's lay out the brozo tape here. I directed. Who's gonna write? I asked the crew. I will. Poem responded already, wheeling over a bedside table with a code sheet, the document that records a chronology of all resuscitative efforts during a code in hand. Excellent. Okay, are the meds there, ready with the pediatric pads? I asked. Yup, said Mark, the tech holding up the pads for pediatric defibrillation from the pediatric code cart. Let me grab my mask and gloves. Miller and ET tube ready. Then I noticed something. Wait, there's no Miller 0 in the department. All I have is a 1. Good to have a 0 in case the kid is small, I said as I laid down the Miller laryngoscope, the tool used to open and visualize the airway, and the endotracheal tube, which is inserted into the trachea for ventilation, both at the head of the bed near my right hand. Mark looked around the code cart, grabbing different trays to no avail. There wasn't a size 0 to be found in the ER. Well then, this will have to work. I grabbed the Yankauer, the long plastic suctioning tip used in various oral medical procedures, and tested it against my gloved hand. Suction is good, I said, tucking it under the mattress head. Ready. Then we stood there staring at one another. The hardest moments are those right before the code arrives, when the air is thick with anticipation of all the terrible things that could happen, and we have time to wrestle with each grisly scenario. I secretly preferred it when the EMS team rolled a patient in unannounced. Sure, we would whine and moan because we had to scramble to prepare everything while treating the patient at the same time. But in reality, such a scenario afforded us the opportunity, really, the luxury of just being in the moment, of doing our job without getting tangled up in the story of the job. Most of the time, though, EMS teams have the courtesy to call ahead, so we stood around the stretcher, reminding ourselves to breathe. What a shitty thing for a Wednesday night, Pam said. A cascade of beeps broke the silence. A convenient feature of this resuscitation room, apart from being spacious, was that it offered a clear view of the ambulance entrance. We stood there at attention as the ambulance backed up to the ER, flashing lights that whirled across the bay doors and floors in a dizzying rotation. Then, with a whoosh, 2 medics swooped in, pushing a small gurney with a tiny patient swathed in white, newborn baby, 12 days old, the first medic reported. Called for not breathing on scene, no pulse. CPR started. Family is on the way. We didn't get the baby's name, we just got to work. Family can fill in those details when they get here. Okay, we'll just register him as Doe, like we always do, Pam interjected. They parked the gurney next to our stretcher and transferred the baby as one medic continued to ventilate the patient by securing the bag valve mask over his face while squeezing the little chamber of air connected to it in order to deliver oxygen to the baby's lungs. How long was the baby down? I asked. We don't know. Parents went in to check on him and found him like this, he responded. How long were you coding in the field? 10 minutes at the scene. About 6 minutes en route. No return of circulation. Okay. What did you give? 3 rounds of epi. Akachek 82. So no need for glucose. IO left lower extremity, unable to tube in the field. As the medic and I talked, Deb was frantically connecting leads from our monitor to the infant. Placing my fingers on the inner aspect of the baby's upper arm, I noted no pulse at the brachial artery. Moving my fingers to the crease at the upper thigh on the same side, I noted no pulse at the femoral artery. Shifting my gaze to the monitor briefly, I saw no shockable rhythm on our monitor. The skin was warm and soft, so smooth, just like a baby's. I listened to the chest to observe that nothing was moving. There was no heartbeat, no sounds of breathing. Please start chest compressions, I said, bracing myself and trying to sound calm. Mark placed what seemed like a giant's fingers on the child's tiny sternum and began to rhythmically press. Okay, another dose of epi. I instructed Pam, please let me know when it's time for another. Just give a heads up about the epi at 5-minute intervals, I requested. Can we just confirm that blood sugar now start intubating? I looked down at the little boy's face for the first time. Dark eyes that were wiped upon, beautiful brown skin with a bluish cast. If this child had still been alive, he would have borne a strong resemblance to my sister's infant son, Eli. He was the specter of the child I didn't have. The ghost of what might have been. His beauty welled up in my eyes, and I had to blink myself back to reality. This was little Angel Doe. At first glance it was impossible to tell if his eyes were black or merely dark, from the pupils being fixed and dilated. In either case, there was nothing behind them. His little purple, pouty lips were half parted, where he'd exhaled goodbye long ago. His face was still encircled by the white of the baby blanket that crowned his head. There was no baby here, just a blanket around the body of a departed cherub. I looked up at Deb. She knew it, too. Everyone around the stretcher knew. We know when a lifeless pod is brought through the door, but we're supposed to make heroic efforts at resuscitation, as they do on TV, when the body is already stiff and blue, but the family is not ready. When arms that have lost the current of life fall limp to the side rails, still, we push several rounds of meds into them, just to document to the family, peer review boards, and the courts what we already know to be true. I took a deep breath as I positioned the baby boy's tiny head and gently placed the Miller blade between his lips. The blade seemed far too large for his mouth. As I advanced the laryngoscope and lifted it up to expose his vocal cords in order to insert the breathing tube, there was tension at the corners of his lips from the size of the blade. I withdrew, opened his jaw, and advanced again. Again, the blade seemed too big. I didn't want to force it through his mouth. I couldn't believe what was happening. Shortly after starting this job, I had completed Dr. Rich Leviton's difficult airway course, in which this renowned guru of emergency medicine gave us his pearls of wisdom regarding endotracheal intubation. The chairman of the hospital's emergency department had been kind enough to send any interested faculty members to the lab Rich ran in Baltimore to attend this class. Even before the course, I had never missed a pediatric intubation during my residency. Outside of some anatomic abnormality, children were the easiest to intubate, because the pediatric airway is shorter and more interior than in adults. The epiglottis, the landmark we often use to locate the vocal cords for endotracheal intubation, is typically so easily visible that you can see it when kids laugh. Given that you didn't usually need a blade to see their epiglottises, technically speaking, there was nothing to most pediatric intubation. And yet now, I couldn't do it. My heart pounded in my fingertips, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I struggled to avoid harming the baby. I knew he was gone, but I couldn't bear the thought of making one tiny cut or scratch on this immaculate little being. I couldn't mar perfection. Resuscitations can be brutal. Ribs are broken with chest compressions. Skin is contused, mouths bloodied, even teeth knocked out. For God's sake. And then, only rarely, after all this medically induced trauma, are people electrocuted back from the dead. I had long been inured to the assaults that medical teams perpetrate on patients for what is considered the greater good until now, when the thought of rendering the tiniest blemish on the body of this dead infant made my hands seize up. Is there a smaller blade? Do we have a Miller Zero? I asked again, muting my panic. It was an absurd question, as I already knew the answer, The nurses scrambled to search the cart again, but still found nothing. We continued the resuscitation, with me holding the mask over the baby's face, squeezing the bag of oxygen to ventilate the child until an advanced airway could be secured with an endotracheal tube. "I'm going out to the truck. I'm pretty sure we have a smaller blade, Doc," said one of the medics, who had hung back to watch the code and help out if needed. In seconds, he returned with a Miller Zero. As I began again, I thought to myself, this has to be better. Certainly, now I could advance, without breaking his little baby jaw. I gently inserted the blade, and still it seemed too big. I met resistance right at the tongue. I couldn't stretch the mouth. I couldn't bruise the gums. I couldn't force the blade back and up. Once again I tried, and once again I failed. "Doc, do you mind if I try?" the same paramedic inquired. I didn't look up. I just stepped aside. "Pam, what's the time?" I asked. "Time for another epi, Doc. 10 minutes. Okay, please give another," I directed. I asked the medic if he was ready to try for the tube, and he said yes. "Please hold compressions 1 moment for intubation," I announced to the crew. The medic drove the blade between the jaws and cranked forward. The corners of the mouth stretched taut, the skin ripping at both corners, thereby permitting the blade, in the same swoop. The neck craned forward, allowing the passage of a small breathing tube. At the medic's first attempt, the tube was in. We continued the fruitless attempts at resuscitation for another 10 minutes. That was finally time for the inevitable end to the code, one that could easily have been called soon after the infant's arrival, wherein I pronounced the time of death. The code had, in actuality, ended long before the baby was rolled into the department. The child had died at home. The time I called in the ER would simply be a formality. I looked around at the team and said, "Guys, this kid is really gone. Does anyone have any further ideas before we call the code?" "No, Doc. There's nothing else to do," one of the nurses said. One by one, the members of the team shook their heads. "Any objections to my calling the code now?" I asked. I got a chorus of "No, Doc." We took our hands off the baby, the bed, the monitors. I checked the non-reactive pupils and the chest to no breath sounds, no heartbeat, no life. Time of death, 1:41 a.m. "Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the hard work." "Is the family here?" "They're out in the waiting room," Pam said. I sighed and shook my head. "Okay, so who's gonna go out with me?" I threw off my gloves and mask as I exited the room. Deb stepped forward and rubbed my arm, signaling support for my efforts and that she'd be the one. The doctor typically doesn't speak with the family alone. They often need more time and support than any ER physician is able to give between patients. So usually a nurse or hospital staff member comes along for the discussion. During the day, it's nice when a chaplain or social worker is available. Now we were heading into the hardest part of the code, the part that had no algorithm, no script, the raw part that never feels good. "By the way," I said, as I stopped and turned back to the group, "did we ever get a name on the baby?" Wendy got up from her desk, which was situated at the front of the ER, between the resuscitation room and front entrance, just kitty corner to both, to answer. "Baby Christopher, Tali, I've verified it with the parents. Everyone's out there. Want me to go get them? You could take them to the back office to talk." "Thanks, Wendy. It's okay. I'm going out." Then Deb and I headed to the waiting room. A crowd of people filled the room. A person I figured was the mother was wringing her hands, a trail of tears blazing down her cheeks. She and a man I assumed to be the father were standing near the door, holding each other up. His eyes were red and puffy. Parents know. They know the way we know. Life is gone as the gurney is rolled through the ambulance doors. Parents know because these angels whisper their last words in their ears and butterfly kiss them goodbye. The others in the waiting room were sitting or pacing, both fearful and hopeful in their anxiety. "Hello, I'm Dr. Harper," I said. "Are you the Talley family?" They all stiffened. The mother's eyes were clouded with grief. "Yes," she whispered. "Please, come with me," I said. An older woman among them stood and told everyone but the parents to stay in the waiting room. She was authoritative, an upright and strong presence. I figured she was the grandmother. The husband supported the mother on the right side and the grandmother on the left as they ushered Mom through the waiting room doors and into the front of the ER. The curtains in front of the resuscitation room, which was just feet away, had been drawn so they could not yet view the scene. Would you like to come with me to the room right over there where we can sit? I asked. No, the mother whimpered. Please, please, just tell me now, she implored. If she hadn't been held up on both sides, she would have tumbled to the floor. She began to wail and sway. Jessica, please, please let the doctor talk, her mother said as she stroked her daughter's hair. Deb asked again, are you sure you all don't want seats? New tell me, the mother shrieked. As she clutched her chest, her mother embraced her and turned toward me. I'm sorry, it's okay, you can tell us. I'm very sorry, I began, but before I could finish the word, the mother fell to the floor. She had already known, but the words were irrevocable confirmation. The father collapsed as well and lay embracing her on the floor. The grandmother gasped, clasping her left hand over her mouth and holding her right hand to her breasts. She stood tall, her watery eyes held fast. There was no space between the mother's cries for me to say anything, no space for words. I could not share the thoughts that were circling in my mind. There was no space in their grief. I couldn't tell them, I'm very sorry you lost your angel baby. I'm very sorry he died while you were sleeping and you didn't get to say goodbye. I'm so sorry that he was already dead when the MS team arrived, and that despite that, 35 minutes of squeezing his tiny heart and pumping it full of enough drugs to jumpstart a car, we couldn't summon him back to life. I'm sorry I couldn't intubate your baby. I'm sorry. It's just that when I propped up his tiny head and inserted the laryngoscope blade, I felt I was hurting him. I'm sorry that the last thing his little corpse experienced was prodding and poking and pressing and tearing. I'm sorry that your beautiful boy is gone. I'm sorry that I can't tell you why, and I'm sorry I can't make it hurt any less. I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry, I said into the space. Everyone else in the front end of the department was silent. The only sound was the parents' wailing and a distant shuffling in the back of the ER. Then the mother tore back the curtain and ran to her baby, spilling once again to the tile beneath her feet. The father was not far behind, crying and pacing, and barely able to support his own weight against gravity. How did this happen? Why did this happen? He was perfect. He was perfect. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was wrong. The mother yelled up to the sky, invisible beyond the hospital ceiling. The grandmother walked to her side and collected her daughter from the floor. A call came in at Wendy's desk, the mother's obstetrician phoning our department. Wendy answered it and walked over to the mother. Mrs. Talley, a Dr. Thomas is on the phone for you. Would you like to take it? Yes, the woman managed to say, and followed Wendy to the phone. She grabbed the receiver in her right hand, cradling her head in her left hand as she braced herself against the section of the counter, encircling the doctors and nurses station that was in front of Wendy. Dr. Thomas, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. Then she listened for a moment and responded, I know. She dissolved into sobs. There was nothing wrong the whole 9 months. I know. The grandmother had just returned from the waiting room, where she had gone to notify the rest of the family. I walked over to her. I'm very sorry, I told her. Do you have any questions? Is there anything we can do for you? Do you know what happened? She asked. I know that when Emus responded to the 911 call, Christopher was not breathing and his heart was not beating. He was not alive at that time. Emus worked really hard to try to bring him back. They gave him medicine to try to start his heart again and make him breathe, but they were not able to bring him back. When he arrived here, his heart was not beating, and he was not breathing. He was not alive. We continued these efforts when he arrived, but we were not able to bring him back, either. She stood facing me, heartbroken, silent with grief. Do you know if he was sick at all? Were there any problems with the pregnancy or delivery or after? I asked her. No. It was tough for them to get pregnant, but when they finally did, everything went well. She was never sick. The delivery went well. They were out of the hospital in 2 days. The baby had a perfect checkup visit. Everything was perfect. She stared at me. How does this happen? She asked, shaking her head. I took a breath. It's so hard to say. Sometimes it's an underlying medical problem a baby is born with. It's nobody's fault. It's just one of those things in nature. Other times, we never have any diagnosable reason for why it happens. Again, I am truly sorry. Thank you, she said, before lowering her head and walking back over to her daughter. Dr. Thomas asked to speak to me. I took the phone and, at the request of the family, informed her of what had happened. She told me the story of the difficult conception. She recounted how happy the parents had been to be pregnant, They were such a cute, hard-working couple, she said. She told me she had known the young woman since she was 16 years old, and now here it was, 16 years later, and she was delivering her first baby. Everything had gone like clockwork. Her voice cracked as we said our goodbyes and acknowledged that it had been a very hard night. As I ticked the pertinent boxes on the death note and hospital chart, my mind began to wander, but I had to keep redirecting my energy to the work. I sent off an email to the medical director requesting smaller pediatric blades in the event of future neonatal codes. One more discussion point for the next staff meeting. I heard Pam muttering to the tech that I should have been able to intubate the child, that there had been no equipment problem. The issue had been me. The tech responded that it didn't really make a difference, since there had been no bringing the dead infant back to life. I heard Deb say that we really should have proper pediatric equipment, and that Pam shouldn't be criticizing me so harshly. I spoke to the medical examiner on call, then notified organ donation that this, like any neonatal death, would be a medical examiner case, so not a candidate for organ donation. Ultimately, the family left, and baby Tally was wrapped snugly in his white blanket and rolled away to the morgue. One by one, the hours passed. Finally, my shift ended and I found myself at home. As the sun rose, I drank a glass of red wine, chased it with chamomile tea and a Benadryl, and fell into a shallow sleep. Hours later, I awoke feeling heavy, and with one thought: I had failed the baby. It was 2 hours before night shift number 2 this week. I knew that my mother would be off work by now. I picked up the phone to tell her of my failure while I prepared my dinner. I stood over my new yellow soup pot from Williams Sonoma. The pot was part of my strategy to buy fancy cookware to encourage me to cook, to get on with life. Much like the monthly order-a-new membership to my yoga studio, this strategy of investing financially in something that would force me to participate in life always worked. I couldn't stare at my pricey pots, pans, and high-speed blender without feeling sufficient guilt over not making use of them regularly. As the soup simmered, I choked on a flood of tears. In that moment, I realized that in all my years of training, I had never really cried. During my residency, when people were brought into the emergency room beaten and stabbed and later died in my arms, I didn't cry. At family conferences, when I had to inform wives that I'd had to put their husbands on ventilators and had no idea whether those men would ever breathe on their own again, there were no tears. And when I had been a desperate girl, a child without a childhood, praying to the crescent moon at midnight that my family might survive, that I might survive, I didn't cry. The pain might have scorched my throat, my eyes might have misted up, but I never truly let myself feel the burn, never. Lowered the floodgates. My divorce only months before had shattered me in ways I had never imagined, but even then, I hadn't fully allowed myself the luxury of a stream of tears. There wasn't time. I had to get through it. I had to push past it to survive and excel. Now here, after graduations, after my divorce, between night shifts, between the cracks in the crumbling stories I had told myself of what my life should look like by now, there was an opening for reflection. The truth was, I had never cared about marriage. I was never a girl who thought there was anything special about the title of wife. Both its historical roots, women used as property, and the state defining legitimate versus illegitimate love to bolster both the patriarchy and the heteronormativity on which it depends, had stained the institution in my eyes. Instead, I valued a spiritual union, which is something that can never be bestowed by anybody besides the souls in the relationship. Sure, traditional marriage made sense from a business perspective, if the conditions of that business were best served by such a contract. When I was young, I didn't dream of being a mother. Most people I knew of chose a partner with the same level of meaningful intention as Ken marrying Barbie, then reproduced reflexively like cattle. So, in my estimation, the mere acts of coupling and multiplying never conferred any singular importance or achievement to neither humans nor the one-celled organisms who can do this too. I figured motherhood would happen for me one day in the future, when I got around to it. It wasn't something I needed to do, but I took for granted that I would. I suppose I took it for granted in the same way I assumed that I would encounter the partner with whom it would make sense to share my life. Settling was not an option. I stood stirring my soup of the day, a rustic chicken stew with quinoa chickpeas, and a selection of veggies, allowing rivers of salt to flow down my face. With each turn of the spoon in the pot, I remembered what it was I actually missed: a healthy, soulful connection to another person. And now that the option of having a family seemed to have evaporated, I grieved that I'd lost the chance to do childhood and spiritual marriage right, the way I had never known them for myself. During our call that day, I told my mother about baby Tally. I recounted how he had looked like Eli and the baby I didn't have. I told her that this new city was far lonelier than I had ever imagined possible. But worst of all was that I might never get to raise a child the way a child should be raised, to provide her with the love and shelter she deserved. My mother responded, reflexively the way many mothers feel they have to. She told me that the baby's death hadn't been my fault, that none of it was my fault. She ended with a statement as certain as fact, that of course I would have the family I wanted one day. She spoke as if time weren't a factor, as if the future held limitless possibilities for me whatever I wanted. But I knew better. I knew that days morph into years, which turned into decades that don't promise particular outcomes. In the same way, no matter how perfect a soul can take its leave from Earth in 12 days or 12 years without so much as a hint, it's human nature to want to bind ourselves to the parts of life we hold dear, whether those parts are actual people, events, items, or dreams. We want to fasten them to us so they're safe and near us forever. But this type of binding phrase, and tears until, even when we fight the awareness, we're forced to see how illusory the reliance on permanence is. What we have, in all its glory, to hug and hold, to caress and learn, to feel and grow, is simply right here and right now. If we are lucky, the bond holds in the moment and the experience of it shines and breathes and expands. Then our story can change in an instant, and we may never be given the gift of why. I didn't have an answer. Baby Tally's family didn't have an answer. We had all been broken in that moment, broken open by shock and grief and anger and fear. I didn't know how or when, but this opening could lead to healing. After all, only an empty vessel can be filled by grace. But to get there, we had to help each other rise while we shed the same tears. We had to get up and start again.
Thank you for listening. Hope that you like it. Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Bye.